3,000 years ago, in the holy city of Jerusalem, King Solomon ordered the construction of a magnificent temple. Its purpose was to house one of the holiest objects of the Old Testament faith, a golden chest known as the Ark of the Covenant, and the stones on which the Ten Commandments were reputedly engraved. According to the Bible, these stones had unimaginable supernatural power.
In ancient times, when anybody came in contact with the contents of the Ark, bad things happened to them. This was probably the last person to have touched the Ark of the Covenant and the stones that were enclosed in it. Even if there is a danger, even if bad things would happen to me by touching the stones, I still have to touch them.
For centuries, the stones lay safe inside Solomon's temple, but then, inexplicably, the chest and the stone tablets disappear from history. How and why they were lost is one of the greatest riddles of the Bible. Now, one man thinks he can solve it.
I'm absolutely sure that I know where the contents of the Ark are.
The golden-topped Dome of the Rock dominates Jerusalem. One of the holiest shrines of Islam, it is here that the Prophet Muhammad is said to have ascended into heaven. But more than 2,000 years ago, this area was the site of another holy place, King Solomon's Temple, the last place the Ark of the Covenant and its contents were ever seen. Mike Sanders is a self-taught biblical scholar who has dedicated half a lifetime to investigating the truth behind the biblical stories. By re-examining the available evidence, Sanders has developed his own theory of the fate of the missing Ark and the lost commandments. He's not the first adventurer to follow this trail, and he'll not be the first to come to Israel and see his precious theories turn to dust. But Sanders is convinced he knows where to look and what he's looking for.
The Bible says that Moses went up to the mountain to talk to God for 40 days. At which point God gave Moses, for the children of Israel, the Ten Commandments and instructions how to build a box to contain them. This box, called the Ark of the Covenant, was a box made of wood covered in gold with some gold statuary above it. If one thinks about it carefully, the box was man-made. Yes, according to God's instructions, but nevertheless made by man. But the stones were handed over by God. And therefore, if there was any power involved, the power would lie with the stones and not with the container. And that's my theory. And so far, when I have discussed this with scholars, it's like a light goes off into their heads. And of course, it is so obvious and so logical that everybody that I've discussed it with tends to agree. If there was a power, it had to have come from the stones, which is given by God himself.
There's endless speculation as to where the stones might be. In Ethiopia, in Jordan, even right here in Jerusalem. These theories have one thing in common. There's not one forensic fact to support them. For Sanders, the trail must start with what the Bible says about the loss of the Ark.
What is quite startling is that there is nothing in the Bible that explicitly says that the Ark disappeared. It seems to just fade from history, but there are clues, and they're very important clues.
According to the Old Testament, 5 years after the death of King Solomon, an Egyptian pharaoh known as Shishak invaded the Holy Land and held Jerusalem to ransom. In return for sparing the city from destruction, Shishak demanded all the treasures of the kingdom of Judah.
Shishak comes to the edge of this kingdom with a vast army of 60,000 foot soldiers and 1,200 chariots. And he sends his emissaries ahead and says, I control totally your country, I will leave you alone, give me all the treasures of your temple and all the treasures of your palace.
To spare the holy city and to save their lives, the Judean people chose to give up all the treasure of Solomon's temple.
And all means all. It is absolutely certain that Shishak took all the treasures of the temple, and all means the Ark of the Covenant and the contents of the Ark.
Sander's theory is built on the assumption that when the Bible says all, it can be taken literally and would certainly have included the Ark. If that's true, what's the likeliest thing the pharaoh Shishak would have done with his sacred plunder? And who was Shishak? There's only one place to start searching for the answer to these questions: Cairo. The world's greatest collection of relics from ancient Egypt is housed here, at Cairo's Egyptian Museum. It's a life's work just to get to know the small proportion of its treasures that are on public display. If the pharaoh Shishak really did pillage Jerusalem, surely some evidence of the loot should be here. These ceremonial stone tablets were discovered hidden beneath the foundations of ancient Egyptian temples. They're known as foundation deposits. Their small size is typical of writing tablets used in biblical times. Sanders believes that these tablets are the best guide to the size of the stones on which the Ten Commandments were written.
Here in this little case, there is a set of stones exactly the size and probably the configuration as one would expect to find in the contents of the Ark of the Covenant. Not the large stones that one would expect from the movies where Charlton Heston walks down with a couple of them underneath his arm, but tiny stones where the Ten Commandments were written, this size.
An expert on foundation deposits is the former director of the museum, Mohammed Saleh.
The foundation deposits are the objects or the artifacts which the ancient Egyptian kings, from the beginning of the history, were putting under some places of construction. Whatever you find in the foundation deposit, you find the names of the kings, who built or who ordered building this building, and the god to whom it was dedicated, and some other information telling us what kinds of tools and instruments were used in these buildings, in the great buildings. They were putting this in special corners.
In the four corners?
In the four corners.
So it was, in fact, most of the important buildings had foundation deposits in them, certainly temples.
Temples, pyramids, palaces, and shrines for the god or for the king.
Knowing that the plundered stones were sacred, Shishak may have hidden them in the foundations of one of his own temples. If he did, this is by far the best chance we have of finding the stones intact.
He would have thought that, we've got the shrine of their god, inside there is the representation of their god, we've won, let's take the stones or whatever is inside that offering and put it in our temple deposit, in our foundation deposit.
If, as Sanders believes, Shishak did indeed put the holy stone tablets in the foundations of a temple, the priceless biblical relics could, to this day, lie in that very same place. The ancient city of Luxor, on the banks of the Nile. Across the river is the Valley of the Kings, along with the tombs and monuments of many pharaohs. The next stage of Sanders' plan is to find out more about the pharaoh referred to in the Old Testament as Shishak. Written on these walls are the histories of the pharaohs. But even though almost all the ancient Egyptian kings are described here, there is no mention of one named Shishak. The fact is, everyone agrees, there never has been a pharaoh known as Shishak. Luckily for Sander's theory, there's a reason for this. Shishak is the Hebrew name the Judean people gave to their oppressor. It's not an Egyptian name at all. But Sanders still has to solve the question, exactly which pharaoh was Shishak? The ancient records of the Egyptian pharaohs may hold the clue. Then, as in more recent times, Egypt was often at war with its neighbors to the north. So which of the warring pharaohs could Shishak have been? A cross-reference in the Old Testament itself may provide a clue. The biblical account of Shishak's invasion states that he only invaded the southern part of the kingdom of Judah. He left the northern territory, known as Israel, untouched. All the other Egyptian pharaohs had always attacked both north and south.
So we have to look for an Egyptian king who never attacked the north, but was powerful enough to attack the south. If you go through the list of all the major Egyptian kings who ever left Egypt, you have Thutmose, who invaded the north. You have Ramesses II, with only one powerful Egyptian king who only attacked the south, and that is Ramesses III. It looks as though Ramesses III is Shishak. There's no question that the discovery of the stones would be the most profound archaeological and even political discovery, not only of the decade, the century, but the millennium.
If Ramesses III really was Shishak, where could he have hidden his loot? Perhaps the monuments left behind by this King of Kings can speak for him. Medinet Habu is the massive mortuary temple Ramesses III left to history as the monument to his memory. Professor Mohammed Saleh has offered to guide Sanders around the site.
All what he had done had been recorded on the walls of this temple in details. Ramses III was a great king. He ruled Egypt for 31 years and some days. We have here some scenes showing the king bringing captives from Asia. The people in the middle are asking the king and the god for mercy. And the king is putting them under his feet.
All those faces are fascinating because each one has different racial characteristics.
Yes. The Egyptians were very good anatomists.
Yes.
Ramesses III was one of the last great warrior pharaohs of ancient Egypt. His reign was a constant chronicle of invasion and conflict with Egypt's neighbors. These conquests would have brought colossal riches to Egypt, and one particular prize seems to be recorded on the temple wall.
I'm here in one of the inner chambers of the mortuary temple of Ramesses III. And the most exciting for me and most interesting part is this wall where there is a golden box and it's being carried on golden poles. And above that golden box is a solar representation with wings. And it doesn't take too much of a stretch of the imagination to see that that golden box was the Ark of the Covenant